What if I told you that thousands of people moved to one state and actually made it dramatically freer? Not in some distant future, but right now with measurable results that you can see today. I'm Mark Edge, and today we're talking with Jason Sorens, the founder of the Free State Project. Jason's going to walk us through the incredible freedom wins that happened in New Hampshire just recently. And trust me, you probably haven't heard about most of these. This isn't libertarian theory. This is real-world freedom that you can actually live under. So, if you've ever wondered whether political change is possible, or if you're looking for a place where you can actually live freer, you're going to want to hear this. Today I have with me a longtime friend, Jason Sorens. Jason, you are the founder of the Free State Project, and today I was hoping to talk to you about New Hampshire and some of the progress you guys have had up there.
Sounds great. It's good to be here, Mark.
I've been trying to do a lifestyle show. I am sick and tired of libertarian theory. I've heard it all, and I know what it's all about. What I really want to do is teach people how to live free in an unfree world. For some, New Hampshire is really the right choice, specifically those who want to be involved in the political process. If I remember correctly, you created the Free State Project as an idea to move 20,000 liberty-loving individuals to one state and see what happened.
Yeah, I mean, the idea was always that they would get active in the political process and help create liberty in our lifetime.
Yeah, I think some people probably didn't like the idea of getting active within the political process. They thought there were other routes. And there's plenty of people who moved to New Hampshire who aren't really terribly involved. They may vote, they may not vote. Maybe they just enjoy the relative freedom that New Hampshire has compared to its socialist neighbors.
That's right. We welcome those folks too. And there are all sorts of ways, broadly speaking, to get involved, whether it's getting involved in media or education or entrepreneurship, promoting crypto, promoting self-sufficiency, all those sorts of things are ways to help make New Hampshire a better and freer place.
New Hampshire is considered by the Cato Institute and the Freedom in the 50 States, which you are an author of. Not exactly the most unbiased opinion here. As the founder of the Free State Project, you declare New Hampshire the freest state in the Union, but I have to agree with you. I have lived in Florida off and on for some years, in New Hampshire quite a bit over the last 20 years. New Hampshire is freer in lots of ways. I think that a few states can claim some freedoms that New Hampshire doesn't have, and it would be really awesome if New Hampshire would add some of those. For instance, I can think of the homestead exemption in Florida. There's some zoning rules in Florida that I think are pretty cool. Colorado and Washington have marijuana legalization. I think they're also going for maybe some psilocybin mushroom legalization. I'm not saying I recommend that people smoke weed, but I am saying that the legal apparatus that tries to lock them up is certainly anti-freedom.
Yeah, that's right. And so you have states that have particular freedoms that New Hampshire doesn't have, but New Hampshire is really the only state that has a really broad range of freedoms across the board. No income tax, no sales tax, marijuana decriminalization, even if not legalization, virtually no gun laws, universal school choice. You go down the list, and New Hampshire has got a wide range of freedom on just about everything.
Let's go over that universal school choice and what that means for parents. There's no government program that means freedom to me, but we can certainly agree that some are freer than others.
Yeah, that's right. And really the idea that justifies school choice is that the government is taxing you anyway to provide schooling. So why not give you back some of the money that you're paying and allow you to put it to your kids' education, whether it's homeschooling or private schooling, or even going to a public school outside your district school. So it definitely breaks up that public school monopoly and is a first step to removing government control of education. So when you look at what New Hampshire's done this year, New Hampshire's become the fifth state that has really truly universal school choice, where every family in the state is eligible to use these tax dollars coming back to the family for either private school or homeschool or another public school. And there's ultimately no cap. There's an interim cap right now of 10,000 students, and we hit that really quickly. Next year, the cap will be 12,500, and then the cap goes away. So We're one of just a handful of states that have such broad eligibility for school choice.
I think in the long run, that hampering the government indoctrination centers is really a giant leap forward for liberty. And I wouldn't want to understate that. I think that it is a real big jump forward, and I'm very excited about it. I also know that there have been some other leaps forward when it comes to New Hampshire. I think it's worth mentioning that New Hampshire is the best choice for people who definitely want to stay in the United States. They like that US experience. They don't mind the cold, and if they'd like to get involved in the political process, even better. People who get involved in the political process are really the ones that are making New Hampshire freer and freer. And in the last one or two political cycles, we've seen some more freedoms. And I know you've been involved in one part in particular. So I just wanted to get an update from you as to what are some of the major highlights, and then let's talk about local control.
Yeah. So there's been a lot just this year. And if you go back a few years, the list is much more significant. But just this year, and I will get to the housing stuff, but we also got rid of the last gun law that New Hampshire has that's tracked by pro-gun control organizations and also the last gun law that's in the Freedom in the 50 States database. So, you have these organizations that track dozens and dozens of state gun laws. New Hampshire's gradually gotten rid of all of them. And the last one was requiring a state level license for gun dealers. And so that was abolished this year. So New Hampshire's definitely the best Second Amendment state out there now. We
Imagine that
also
you still need a federal license to sell guns.
Sure, you still
Yeah,
need the FFL, right? So
right.
we haven't gotten out from under federal laws there yet.
Yeah, and that at this time, that is not possible. So we're just trying to make it as free as we can.
That's right, that's right. And there are some tougher things on our list that we'll get to once we've taken care of business at home.
A lot of
Yeah.
people critique New Hampshire for things like you've got Democrat senators, or you still have the FFL law. And the original idea that you had was move 20,000 liberty-loving individuals to one state, and we'll see what happens. Will it be positive? And I think that we can say that what it is has been positive and it invigorating what's been done. But because they haven't done the thing that you would want them to do, secede from the Union or elect a pro-war Republican to sit in the Senate seat, doesn't mean that they're not being successful.
That's right. So if you're the type of person who really celebrates every win, who enjoys seeing more real world freedom for yourself and for others, New Hampshire is offering that more and more every year. If you want heaven on earth, then you're not going to be pleased with New Hampshire or anywhere else.
I don't
So,
understand. If I could complain just for a second, Jason,
yeah.
I do not understand somebody who lives in Maine, Vermont, upstate New York, Massachusetts. I don't mean Buffalo upstate, but I mean that sort of pointy uppy part of New York, Albany, that kind of area, that claims to be a libertarian and doesn't move for the Free State Project. I just don't get it. I suppose I could understand if you lived in, say, Montana or something that's that far away. It's like, oh, it was a long trip to get back to see mom. In most cases, there's no point in New Hampshire that's more than 35 miles from the next closest state. So you can't claim to be too far.
Wow, I didn't realize 35 miles. That is close. Yeah, I mean, New England's very drivable. You can get just about anywhere pretty quickly. You've got mountains, you've got beaches, you've got lots of jobs close by, lots of schooling options for your kids, right? So it's really a high quality of life place, and it's a high social capital place where neighborhoods are strong. You'll get to know your neighbors if you want to. And neighbors help each other. So it's one of those places. It's like what America used to be in its better aspects. So there's a lot of personal benefit you can get by living in New Hampshire.
Yeah, I would agree with that completely. I lived near Keene, New Hampshire for about 15 years. And in the different places I lived, I was involved in local government to some extent. And, I knew about the crime that went on in my local towns. And generally, that crime centers around people who don't seem to have a lot of problem with crime. Whatever happens, it kind of happens to the folks that doing that kind of thing. The biggest problem we had was dog calls. Hey, I don't know this dog, it's on my land, it's running around, it killed my chicken. If that's your biggest crime problem, that's a pretty good thing.
Right. And the risk of stranger crime is especially extremely low. Let's get back to some of the other wins from this
Yes.
year because it's pretty exciting. We could talk about the budget. So New Hampshire is facing a revenue shortfall, and they fixed it by raising zero taxes.
I
No
love that.
taxes were increased, cutting spending exclusively. So the general fund was cut by 7% in the next fiscal year compared to this year, and the university system budget was cut by 17%. New Hampshire now has the least public funding for its university system, which I think is great. As a former academic who is employed in the university system, I can say it's ridiculous for conservatives and Republicans to be funding their adversaries. And the university system is staffed by their adversaries, and it's doing everything it can to churn out future adversaries. And so there's no reason for this to be taxpayer subsidized. It's a regressive form of spending because you're taking money from everybody, including working class people who don't have college degrees, and you're spending it on generally higher income people with college degrees. So I'm very pleased that we've cut spending. We are also now the first state in over a century to offer a pathway to free market electricity. So this bill would allow for new electric power generators to set up shop and set up their own alternative grids. And if they do this, they're not regulated by the Public Utilities Commission. So their rates are not regulated. They don't have these kind of universal service requirements, none of that stuff. And so it would be, if we see this happen, it'll be the first time that we really have free market electricity anywhere in the country in over a century. We do have companies that sometimes do cogeneration, right, where they generate their own electricity for their own use. But this would be something different where you could actually set up a free market electricity provider and sell to companies. So long as you're not connecting to the main grid, the existing grid, you can do this. So it's pretty exciting. I mean, it's being billed as a solution for data centers and similar kind of energy intensive forms of production, but it could be a model for the rest of the country.
It's a great idea. I imagine there's some listeners that will, yeah, they'll have that experience straight away. They'll know what the benefits are.
Yeah, yeah. In housing and zoning, this is one thing I work on. I started working on this about a decade ago because New Hampshire had relatively high housing costs, and that reflects demand for housing. People like to live in New Hampshire, so there's good demand, but it also reflects constrained supply. And it was one of the few areas in Freedom of the 50 States where New Hampshire was actually below average. And it was by far the most significant area where New Hampshire was below average.
The supply of it or something else?
Below average in terms of their regulations on housing. So through zoning laws, especially, we can also talk about building codes, which are different that tell you, construction standards and how you build. But zoning tells you how you can use your land, what types of dwelling units or commercial uses you can put on your land. And then there are other sort of permits that are required sometimes from the state level for driveways on state highways, or if you're doing a lot of terrain modification. So there are lots of government regulations that apply to development, whether it's residential, commercial, and New Hampshire in particular regulated residential development quite a bit. And now I won't say that we've fully solved the problem, but we've made some massive strides this year.
I wouldn't imagine you've solved the problem either, but moving in
No,
the right direction, I think is what people really are looking for. I had a house in Southwest New Hampshire, and I was trying to build a master bedroom that wasn't going to increase the footprint of the house. The state of New Hampshire said, sure, go ahead. The town just wouldn't let it go through. I hired a lawyer. No, nothing we can do. I mean, this local control issue is important in New Hampshire. I get it. You don't want the state to control things, but turning over the locality is not a solution.
Yeah, absolutely. And part of the problem is that these people really are not experienced in what they are ruling on, and we rely on volunteers at the town level, and that's great in some offices. And I think for setting budgets and managing departments, it's great that we don't have a big professional political class at the local level. But when you've got people who are able to decide what you can and cannot do with your land, and they don't understand architecture, they don't understand the environmental science, it's a real problem. And sometimes they're highly motivated to oppose stuff just because they don't like change.
That's
I've
exactly what it
encountered.
comes down to is that I mean you hear them
Yeah.
over and over again. It's basically if it's any more thing more than a single family unit on 5 acres, you're trying to turn New Hampshire into Massachusetts.
The irony there is Massachusetts has just as strict zoning regulations as New Hampshire.
Imagine.
So, how well did that work for them? If anything, Boston might be the most tightly regulated city in America, even worse than San Francisco in terms of being able to build. So, yeah, I think I saw a statistic the other day that 99% of what is built in Boston is technically illegal, right? It's illegal under the current zoning ordinance.
It just means you got to pay somebody off.
That's right. It's all discretionary. They can issue a variance, but you've got to pay to the city councilman's preferred nonprofit. So yeah, it opens avenues for corruption when you do strictly limit what people can build. I'm sure there's a lot of favoritism that goes in there. Whom if you know the people on the planning board and you've lived in town for a while, they're going to waive your application through. But if you're someone relatively new in town, doesn't someone who doesn't know everybody, who hasn't built up those relationships, they're going to make it hard for you. So
And
this is something I do think state government should get involved, just as they do to limit what localities can do in terms of limiting your gun rights. We've done that time and time again in New Hampshire. We've said no Concord, no Portsmouth, Durham, Hanover. You cannot ban people from carrying guns publicly. You can't ban concealed or open carry, even if you want to. And that's because it's a basic right. And in the same way, property rights are a basic right. It's recognized in the U.S. Constitution, Fifth Amendment. Government can't take your land for public use without compensating you. And yet they think they can destroy the value of your land by regulating it and not have to compensate you. So that is a real problem. I wouldn't have such a big problem with really strict zoning regulations if the towns had compensated landowners when they enacted them, right? If they had said, we know we're taking away your development rights, that's going to reduce the value of your land. Fair market compensation. Then at least they're paying a market price that's somehow related to some value that they're trying to achieve. But right now, it doesn't matter how valuable the project is that you want to do. It could create tens of millions of dollars in property value and lower property taxes for the town. If they don't want it, they can just, ban it. And it leads to bad decision making.
that's right. And the towns would never, they're too cheap. They don't make their own money like the US government does, and they'd never be able to pay this. It would have to be terribly important. And, I don't know of any zoning laws that are terribly important at this point.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's just an indication that they're not worth the value they're destroying.
New Hampshire had, how many did you say, laws that passed that limited this sort of local control recently?
Yeah, so I count about 16 laws that have been signed by the governor that in some way ease development, in some way, reduce the regulations on development. And some of them are more significant than others, but some of these are very significant. So, for example, we have a law now that says if you own a home, you can build accessory dwelling units, like an in-law apartment, separate living facility, either attached or detached by right. What that means is that the town can't require a public hearing. They have no discretion. They can't deny you the permit. You just take your architect's plans down to the planning department and get them signed off. And they have no discretion there. So every
Because
town
we
must
had
allow that.
this auxiliary dwelling law previously, and what the towns
Mhm.
were doing was just saying, I don't think so. They'd put hurdles up. And this is how the rich people get what they want and the poor people don't. And then the town wins.
That's right. Yeah, this drastically reduces the cost and uncertainty associated with building that ADU. It also says they can't require you to build more than one parking space per unit. So they can do that. They can require you to build an extra parking space, but that's it. So yeah, we had some towns that required you to build 4 parking spaces for a 750 square foot apartment with 1 bedroom. It's just ridiculous. We also passed a law saying that towns cannot require more than 1 parking space per dwelling unit for any development. So whether it's an apartment building or a single family home, you cannot, as a town, require that the builder build more than 1 parking space. And I really like this. In fact, I think we should get rid of all parking minimums, because they make no sense.
I imagine there's a lot of people out there that are saying to themselves, but I need parking where I live. So, shouldn't the government mandate this?
It's a classic issue of the seen and the unseen from Frederick Bastiat, right? Parking isn't free, right? The more parking you build, the less room you have for yard, for nature, for buildings. You have to minimum, roll out some blacktop and, some sort of paved surface that it costs money to do that. It also takes away other things you can build. Sometimes you want to build that parking because it's useful to you, and you have every incentive to do that, right? So a developer is going to want to build as much parking as the customers want. The tenants of an apartment complex, parking is something that they'll look at before they sign a lease. And so you want to have adequate parking if you own an apartment complex. There's no reason for the government to force developers to build more parking than people want. So we're going to reduce nature, we're going to reduce um, dwelling units. We're going to reduce the housing that we have. For surface parking lots create environmental harms because this is an impermeable surface, right? So it increases flooding risk. It results in runoff of automobile effluvia into the groundwater. You have to plow them. They are aesthetically displeasing, right? No one likes to walk across a gigantic surface parking lot in the middle of summer or the middle of winter, right? They are baking hot in summer and windy and frigid in winter. And they don't pay any property taxes, right? The property value of a parking lot is not much more than that of raw land. And so you're not paying property taxes to the town. So the more parking you're forcing people to build, the higher the property tax bill for everyone else in town. So it really makes absolutely no sense to require minimum parking. The market's going to provide the parking that people want.
But ultimately, there will be some manner or another to park.
That's right. And if you end up having on-street parking that you charge people for, so much the better. A little revenue source for the town. It's a market solution where you can say, well, we'll charge people more during peak hours and in off-peak hours. Maybe it's free when it's off-peak. And so that allows you to allocate parking to the people who value it the most. We should rely on the free market to provide parking, is my bottom line here.
Look at towns that try to limit parking in whatever way. They're always running up against difficulties. Who wants to park all day in a given spot? Who's just a renter who's living upstairs versus somebody who's coming to eat lunch? It's difficult. I think the market will best solve parking problems.
Absolutely. And I'm also against parking maximums, by the way. We are starting to have some towns that are enacting parking maximums. The state hasn't done anything about that. But, I think those are probably less harmful, but also still harmful. Other things, we have legalized, we're the first state to do this statewide, to legalize building single stair apartments up to 4 stories. So under the building code, it was previously legal to build single stair apartments up to 3 stories. Now it's 4 stories, and that is getting us closer to the international standard. In Europe and most other countries, you can build single stair apartments up to 6 stories, provided you have, fire doors and sprinklers and things like that. And new buildings have those things. Those things are required in new buildings. So we have the fire safety measures that make it feasible now to have a single exit for these apartment buildings. And they're much more aesthetically pleasing when you can have, for instance, a central courtyard, right, that you're building apartments around, or you can fit an apartment complex on an irregularly shaped lot, right, that maybe you couldn't do before. If you require 2 exits, that's what's led to the explosion of these sort of double-barreled corridor forms of development, right, where you have this internal corridor and you've got apartments on both sides of that corridor and you've got stairways at both ends. That's meant to fit that building code requirement, but it means less natural light in those apartments because you have no windows all on one full side of these apartments. So that's a nice thing that we've allowed. We've also legalized using private agencies to inspect buildings and certify documents. So if the town is slow walking your application, your building permit application, trying to get a certificate of occupancy so you can actually occupy the building, you can now go to a certified third-party provider private agency like an architect or an engineer who has experience in these things. So that should help speed up the development process. We've legalized residential development in commercially zoned areas. So now you can build apartments in an area where you allow office buildings and things like that. You also have to let people build apartments. And you can take a vacant commercial building now anywhere in the state and convert it into apartments without any zoning restrictions at all, so long as you're maintaining the existing building footprint. So you're just converting the interior of a building into residential uses. You can just do that. It's called adaptive reuse. And it makes sense. Like there's no reason for towns to restrict the use of a building that's already vacant and sitting there. And we want these buildings to be reused.
A lot of times you're talking about mills in New Hampshire, or maybe some kind of manufacturing place, and for whatever reason that business isn't functioning anymore, and it allows you to go in and build housing in this place. They did it in Keene, and I think that's great.
We also have now passed a law that virtually eliminates any municipal technical amendments to the state building and fire codes. What that means is towns cannot make the building code stricter than it already is. My town requires deeper wells than the state requires. There's no real reason for it. They also require that new wells be tested for PFOAs, which are a problem in parts of the whole country, really. But that's something a new homeowner wants to do anyway. Like you don't have to require that this testing be done before you can issue a certificate of occupancy. Anyway, that's a nice bill because it provides some standardization from across the state where builders can say, okay, I know what the requirements are in New Hampshire. I can build this type of house pretty much anywhere.
We're at the end of our time here. If folks are just, they're so excited by hearing about all the freedom in New Hampshire and they want to move, I would recommend freestateproject.org. Anything else you want to plug, Jason?
If you are interested in the housing issues and following my work, you can find some of that at AIER.org. That's the American Institute for Economic Research. It's been great to chat with you, Mark, talking about all the great new freedoms that Granite Staters enjoy after this year's legislative session.
I will definitely have you back on, Jason. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Mark.
If this conversation got you thinking about what's possible when liberty-minded people actually concentrate their efforts, I encourage you to check out the Free State Project at freestateproject.org. The progress Jason outlined today didn't happen by accident. It happened because people decided to stop complaining and start moving. And honestly, if you're living in Massachusetts, Vermont, Maine, or really sort of anywhere in the Northeast and you claim to care about freedom, I don't understand why you haven't made the move yet. New Hampshire's right there. This has been another episode on how you can actually live free in an unfree world. And if you found value in this conversation, subscribe and hit the notification bell. And because I'm going to keep bringing you real solutions, not just more theory. Until next time, this is Mark Edge reminding you that freedom isn't just an idea, it's a lifestyle that you can choose to live.